For centuries, humanity had been the subjugated species, slaves to the might of the Vothar Empire. A towering civilization of reptilian overlords, the Vothar had seen themselves as the pinnacle of intelligence and dominance, lording over countless alien species with an iron fist. They believed they were untouchable, the galaxy's rulers in an unyielding cycle of conquest and oppression. And for a long time, they were right. Humanity, though, had never given up. They had learned the language of their masters, studied their strategies, and bided their time. The humans worked in the deepest, most dangerous mines, stripped of their rights, their identities, their dignity. Yet, even in the darkest corners of the Empire, there were whispers of revolt, of rebellion, of a time when the chains would be broken. That time had come. It started with one man, Alexander Kane, an ex-soldier turned slave. He was a man forged in the fire of war, broken and rebuilt in the deepest shadows of the Empire's most fortified slave camps. Kane had seen what no one else could, a flaw in the Vothar's supposedly perfect system. The Empire, with all its weapons and technologies, was still a beast of bureaucratic red tape, riddled with corruption and decay. And there were cracks that humanity could exploit. With the help of a small, but growing underground resistance, Kane began to gather a force. He didn't just rely on raw power, though. Humanity was clever, adaptable, traits the Vothar had never bothered to appreciate. Using intelligence and subversion, Kane's resistance worked in secret. Sabotaging the Vothar's supply chains, spreading disinformation, and igniting small uprisings that quickly spread across the Empire like wildfire. The first battle was a massacre. The Vothar were unprepared, still dismissive of humanity's strength. But Kane had anticipated every move. He had studied their tactics, their weaknesses. The Empire's massive war machines, designed to crush entire worlds, were now facing an enemy they had never accounted for, humanity's unyielding spirit and brilliance. Kane's victory was symbolic. The first planet liberated, Sarin 7, was a small, resource-poor world. But it had strategic significance. Once the planet's defenses fell, a message was sent throughout the Empire. Humanity was no longer content to bend the knee. The tides had begun to turn. From there, the war for the galaxy began in earnest. The resistance grew in numbers and strength, drawing in countless races who had also suffered under the Vothar's yoke. The Empire's fragile alliances began to splinter as the cracks deepened. The Vothar, once seemingly invincible, now found themselves fighting on multiple fronts, and their once unified war machine began to falter. Kane's reputation spread like wildfire. Stories of his bravery, intelligence, and ruthlessness in battle began to inspire millions of oppressed beings across the galaxy. And then, it happened. Kane's forces launched a daring strike on Vothar Prime itself, the heart of the Empire. The planet, surrounded by an impenetrable fleet, had been considered untouchable. Yet, in the dead of night, humanity and its allies struck with a precision that no one had expected. The capital fell in a week. The Vothar Emperor was captured, stripped of power, and executed in a very public display. It was a symbol, a clear message to the galaxy: humanity had freed itself, and now the Vothar Empire was no more. But the destruction of the Vothar was not the end of humanity's rise, it was only the beginning. Humanity had tasted power. They had shown the galaxy their true potential. With the fall of the Empire, countless alien factions scrambled for dominance, but there was one force that stood above all. Alexander Kane, now a legend, was at the helm of the galaxy's new order. A new era was dawning, an era where humanity would not be the victim, but the ruler. And the galaxy would tremble in fear at what they had unleashed. The fall of the Vothar Empire marked the beginning of an era that would forever reshape the galaxy. The Vothar, once the unquestioned overlords of countless species, were gone, and their once unbreakable empire lay in ruins. But with the empire's collapse came a power vacuum, one that humanity, led by the legendary Alexander Kane, would fill. For months, the galaxy was in chaos. Former Vothar colonies, once pacified and subjugated, were now left to their own devices. In some regions, rival factions fought tooth and nail for dominance, while in others, former slaves sought revenge on their oppressors. The power vacuum left behind was a dangerous, volatile space, and humanity, through Kane's strategic genius, saw an opportunity to take the reins. Kane understood something that many other galactic leaders had missed: control of the galaxy wasn't just about military might, it was about influence. Humanity's rise wasn't merely a tale of military victories. It was a story of strategic alliances, of carefully orchestrated diplomacy, of promises made to former enemies that would later be broken when the time was right. Under Kane's rule, humanity quickly began to organize itself into a unified force. The resistance that had fought so hard for freedom was now the foundation of a new empire. The warlords of the various human factions were brought together under one banner, as Kane's charisma and cunning drew even the most stubborn leaders into his fold. To them, he promised not just power but a place in the new world order, a chance to be more than they had ever been under the heel of the Vothar. And, as Kane had predicted, the galaxy began to take notice. Former Vothar allies who had once treated humanity as nothing more than an expendable tool in the Empire's arsenal were now scrambling to find favor with the new power rising. Those who had once sneered at humanity's resilience now found themselves in the uncomfortable position of having to appease it. Kane wasn't interested in merely replacing one oppressor with another, but rather in creating an empire that would be as vast and enduring as the Vothars had once been. Humanity's empire, however, wasn't built solely on diplomacy and alliances. Kane knew that to truly solidify his control, he would need to send a message, one that the galaxy would never forget. Humanity's strength, once seen as a fragile thing, was now undeniable. Kane's first major military campaign as Emperor was a reminder of just how far humanity had come. A coalition of former Vothar warlords had banded together, hoping to challenge humanity's growing power. They had underestimated the ruthlessness and precision with which humanity now fought. The battle took place on a desolate, rocky moon, strategically important but devoid of civilians. Kane, using cutting-edge tactics and technology stolen from the remnants of the Vothar Empire, launched a blitzkrieg that shattered the enemy forces in a matter of hours. The once feared Vothar warlords were obliterated, and humanity's message was clear: anyone who dared to stand against them would be crushed without mercy. As the ashes of the battlefield settled, Kane addressed the galaxy from a broadcast ship hovering above the moon's surface. His words were simple, but they carried the weight of 1,000 victories. "The galaxy has tasted the wrath of humanity," Kane proclaimed, his voice carrying across the stars, "and it will never forget." The message was received loud and clear. Across the galaxy, former slave species, allies, and enemies alike realized that humanity was no longer the underdog. No longer the oppressed. No longer the weak. Humanity had risen to a place of dominance, and there was no one who could challenge it. But as Kane's empire expanded, so too did the seeds of its future challenges. Not every species was willing to bend the knee to a human-led order, and some, though crushed beneath humanity's might, began to harbor resentment. For every victory humanity won, new enemies rose from the ashes of the old empire, ready to test the resolve of their new masters. Though Kane had united humanity under a single banner, the road ahead would be anything but peaceful. The galaxy had yet to see the full extent of the power that humanity now wielded, but one thing was certain: the fear of the humans was only just beginning. Humanity's rise had been meteoric, a relentless surge of power and influence that had swept through the ashes of the Vothar Empire. Under the leadership of Alexander Kane, humanity had gone from a broken species to the dominant force in the galaxy. Yet, in the vast expanse of space, not everyone was content with the new order. Old enemies, former allies, and the remnants of fallen empires all plotted in the shadows, waiting for their moment to strike. The first true test of humanity's strength came from an unexpected quarter: the Ilthur Combine. The Ilthur were a race of technologically advanced, hive-minded insects, with a deep cultural history of isolationism. Under the Vothar, they had been forced into a subservient role, but they had never been fully conquered. For years, they had bided their time, quietly building up their fleets and technological capabilities, waiting for the opportune moment to reclaim their sovereignty. That moment, they believed, had arrived. The Ilthur's strategy was calculated. They didn't strike directly at humanity's core worlds, which would have been suicide. Instead, they attacked the colonies humanity had just begun to establish on the outer rim, the territories that were still in the process of being secured. In an instant, they unleashed a swarm of thousands of ships, each outfitted with advanced weapons that humanity had never encountered. The sheer scale of the assault was overwhelming, designed to catch humanity off guard and force them into a costly war of attrition. Kane's response was swift, as always, but this time, he faced a challenge unlike any before. Humanity's forces were spread thin, stretched across multiple fronts as they continued to solidify control over the fractured galaxy. The Ilthur's surprise attack revealed a vulnerability in humanity's defensive strategy, one that would require more than just brute force to overcome. Kane, never one to back down from a challenge, called upon his most trusted commanders, each of them a seasoned veteran who had fought in the war to overthrow the Vothar. Together, they began to devise a counteroffensive that would take the Ilthur by surprise. Humanity had learned many lessons from its time as slaves. They were adaptable, resourceful, and above all, relentless. The key to defeating the Ilthur lay in their hive mind structure. Though it made them formidable in battle, it also made them predictable. The Ilthur's centralized leadership, hidden deep within their fleets, could be disrupted. If humanity could sever their communications, the Ilthur would fall into disarray, unable to coordinate their forces. Kane's forces struck with surgical precision. Using stealth ships and advanced hacking technologies, humanity's fleet infiltrated the Ilthur's outer defenses, cutting off their communications networks. Within hours, chaos erupted within the Ilthur ranks. The once unified swarm turned into a disorganized mass, vulnerable to targeted strikes. Humanity's fleet, led by Kane himself, descended on the Ilthur's homeworld, a dark, labyrinthine planet surrounded by layers of defense. This was not a world that could be conquered through brute force alone. It was a planet of secrets, of traps, of ancient technologies that even the Vothar had never fully understood. But humanity had something the Ilthur did not: ingenuity. Kane led the final assault on the Ilthur's capital city, a sprawling, towering structure made of black crystalline material. The battle was long and brutal, with the Ilthur fighting with the desperation of a species that knew its existence was at stake. The air was thick with the hum of energy weapons, the crackle of shields, and the hiss of alien biology colliding with human firepower. At the heart of the capital, Kane faced the Ilthur Queen, the central intelligence that controlled the hive mind. She was a towering figure, her chitinous form draped in glowing circuitry that pulsed with a strange, otherworldly energy. But even she, a being of immense power, could not withstand the tide of humanity's fury. Kane engaged her in a final, brutal battle, a test of will, of strength, and of survival. The Ilthur Queen fell, and with her, the hive mind crumbled. The once mighty insectoid empire was shattered, its forces scattered across the stars. Humanity had once again triumphed, but the cost was high. The galaxy was beginning to realize the full extent of humanity's power, and the full price of defying it. The Ilthur had been just the beginning. As word of their defeat spread, other factions began to rethink their positions. Some, seeing the sheer might of humanity's war machine, chose to align themselves with the new order. Others, emboldened by the Ilthur's initial successes, began to stir in the shadows, plotting their own rebellions. Kane knew the galaxy would never be truly at peace. There would always be those who feared humanity, those who sought to overthrow or undermine their power. But he also knew this: humanity had come too far to turn back. The whip was in their hands now, and the galaxy would tremble at their wrath. Humanity's victory over the Ilthur Combine was a testament to their power, but it also exposed the fractures in the galaxy's fragile peace. The Ilthur had been one of the most technologically advanced species in the galaxy, and their defeat left behind a trail of uncertainty. While some factions bent the knee to humanity, others, those who had long been oppressed, or had once been allies of the Vothar, viewed this new human empire with distrust, even hatred. There were whispers in the corners of the galaxy, murmurs of rebellion, of growing movements seeking to challenge the burgeoning human empire. Some of these factions had once been slaves under the Vothar, while others were opportunistic warlords seeking to take advantage of the chaos. They saw Kane's empire as no different from the old Vothar regime, a brutal, expansionist power seeking to dominate. For Kane, this was not just a matter of military conquest. It was a question of control. Humanity's ascendancy could not be sustained through force alone, it required the cooperation of those who feared and despised them. To achieve that, Kane had to show the galaxy that humanity was not a new empire of tyranny, but a force that could bring stability and order to a fractured galaxy. But he also knew that some factions would never accept humanity's rise. They would need to be eliminated. Kane's answer to this growing threat was a plan that had been in motion for some time, a secret project known only as the Phoenix Protocol. The Phoenix Protocol was not just a military strategy, it was a psychological weapon. It was designed to deal with the galaxy's most stubborn enemies, those who would never submit through diplomacy or military force. The protocol's purpose was simple: destabilize, crush, and annihilate any opposition before it could take root. It would become the foundation of humanity's strategy for maintaining control over the galaxy. At the heart of the Phoenix Protocol was the creation of a new type of weapon, a fleet of ships so advanced, so terrifying in their capabilities, that they would ensure no one would dare oppose humanity again. The ships, known as the Phoenix-class dreadnoughts, were equipped with technology far beyond anything humanity had ever used in combat. These ships were not merely weapons of war, they were symbols, designed to instill fear in anyone who saw them. Each Phoenix-class ship was a massive construct, capable of wiping entire fleets from existence with a single volley. They were armed with weapons that could bypass the strongest shields, disrupt enemy communications, and disable entire planets' infrastructure. But it wasn't just the power of these ships that made them terrifying, it was the message they carried. To face the Phoenix-class ships was to face humanity's wrath in its most absolute, unforgiving form. With the Phoenix Protocol in place, Kane sent a clear signal to the galaxy. Anyone who dared to oppose humanity would find themselves facing a force unlike any they had ever encountered. And those who thought themselves safe, hiding in distant corners of space, would soon learn that no place in the galaxy was beyond humanity's reach. The first test of the Phoenix Protocol came when a coalition of rogue factions, including several former Vothar allies and resurgent criminal syndicates, launched a coordinated strike on one of humanity's Outer Rim territories. These groups believed that, now the Ilthor had been crushed, it was time to challenge humanity's dominance. They had underestimated Kane's resolve. Within days, the Phoenix-class dreadnoughts appeared, descending upon the rogue fleet like harbingers of doom. The battle that followed was one-sided. The rogue forces, though numerous and well-equipped, stood no chance against the sheer might of humanity's new weaponry. One by one, their ships were obliterated, their command structures shattered, and their fleets scattered to the winds. But the real message was not the destruction of the rogue fleet, it was the unblinking, cold power of the Phoenix-class ships. The galaxy watched as humanity's new weapon was put to use, and their fear grew. The Phoenix Protocol was not just a military doctrine, it was the realization that the galaxy was now under humanity's control, and no one was safe from its reach. Kane knew that some would still resist, that not every threat could be eliminated with a fleet of dreadnoughts. But he also knew this: the Phoenix Protocol was a deterrent. It would remind the galaxy that humanity had not only the will to conquer but the means to ensure that no one would ever challenge their supremacy again. Yet, even as Kane reveled in his growing empire, he knew that peace was an illusion. The galaxy was too vast, too complex, to be ruled by any one entity for long. There would always be those who would plot against humanity, who would seek to tear down what had been built. The Phoenix Protocol was but a temporary solution. And in the shadows of the galaxy, enemies were already gathering, preparing for a reckoning that would test humanity's resolve like never before. The true war had not yet begun. Though humanity's might was undeniable, the seeds of rebellion had not been eradicated. Despite the terror instilled by the Phoenix-class dreadnoughts, not all factions were willing to accept humanity's rule without resistance. Deep within the Outer Rim, a new movement was taking shape, a movement born not from the ashes of the Vothar Empire, but from the fear and hatred stirred by humanity's aggressive expansion. This movement, known as the Eclipsed, was a shadowy coalition of species and former Vothar loyalists who had escaped the initial purges and destruction wrought by Kane's forces. They were not merely rebels, they were survivors of a galaxy turned upside down. They had seen the fall of their empires, the obliteration of their worlds, and the rise of humanity as the new overlords of the galaxy. And now, they had one goal: to bring down the human empire. The Eclipsed movement was unlike any other rebellion humanity had faced. They were not scattered, disorganized rebels. They were a network of cells, spread across the galaxy, each one deeply entrenched in the local political landscape and well-armed with stolen Vothar and Ilthar technologies. What made them particularly dangerous was their ability to blend into the galaxy's complex web of alliances, often hiding in plain sight. The leader of the Eclipsed was a mysterious figure known only as Voss. Little was known about him, his true identity remained a closely guarded secret, but his influence spread like wildfire. Voss was a master strategist, capable of rallying even the most disparate factions under one banner, and his network of spies, infiltrators, and saboteurs was unparalleled. His belief was simple: humanity had overextended itself, and it was only a matter of time before the Empire would crumble under the weight of its own ambitions. The first major strike of the Eclipsed came when a covert team infiltrated one of the human empire's most critical supply hubs, a massive shipyard in the orbit of a distant mining world. The hub was responsible for producing the next generation of Phoenix-class dreadnoughts, ships that would secure humanity's reign for the foreseeable future. Voss knew that if humanity's ability to build more of these vessels could be crippled, the balance of power would tip. With surgical precision, the Eclipsed forces launched their attack, breaching the shipyard's outer defenses and infiltrating the core systems of the station. Within hours, the shipyard's production line was destroyed, its critical systems disabled, and vital resources stolen. The Empire's ability to build its next wave of dreadnoughts was crippled. But the most significant blow came not from the destruction itself, but from the propaganda that followed. The Eclipsed had managed to broadcast their attack live, sending a message across the galaxy: humanity's strength is a lie. We can bleed them. We can defeat them. The galaxy watched in stunned silence as humanity's supposed invincibility was shattered. The Phoenix Protocol, once a symbol of absolute power, had been humiliated. For the first time in years, the galaxy saw that the human empire was vulnerable. Kane was furious. The loss of the shipyard was a blow to his pride, but it was more than that: it was a challenge to his authority. The message broadcast by the Eclipsed ignited a fire in the hearts of those who had been waiting for an excuse to rebel. Factions who had previously feared the power of humanity now saw an opening. The galaxy, which had been quaking in terror at the Phoenix dreadnoughts, was suddenly emboldened. The Eclipsed had struck at the heart of humanity's power, and the ripple effects were felt across the Empire. As news of the attack spread, unrest grew. Systems that had once been under tight human control began to experience revolts. Planets that had remained compliant in the face of humanity's dominance now questioned their loyalty. Even some of humanity's own allies, alien species who had once been too afraid to act, began to distance themselves, unwilling to side with a regime that might not be as invincible as they had believed. Kane, ever the strategist, knew that this couldn't stand. The Eclipsed had opened a wound, and it needed to be sealed, quickly. He called upon his most trusted generals in his inner circle, and together they devised a plan to crush the movement before it could gather any more momentum. But as Kane prepared for a counteroffensive, he realized something crucial: the Eclipsed weren't just attacking humanity's military might, they were attacking the very foundation of the Empire itself. The Phoenix Protocol, the symbol of humanity's strength, had been undermined. The galaxy no longer feared humanity, they saw the cracks, the weaknesses, and they were ready to exploit them. In the shadow of the Eclipsed's victory, Kane faced a critical decision. He could crush the rebellion, of course, but that would only breed more dissent. Alternatively, he could try to negotiate, to offer a semblance of peace, to quell the fires of rebellion before they spread too far. But peace had never been his goal. Humanity had earned its place at the top of the galactic hierarchy through sheer willpower. And if the galaxy refused to bend to that power, Kane would make them. the war for the future of the galaxy was far from over. And as the Eclipsed gathered strength, Kane knew that the real test of humanity's resolve had only just begun. In the wake of the Eclipsed's stunning victory, the galaxy was a powder keg waiting to explode. The rebellion had sparked a fire of dissent that spread far faster than humanity anticipated. What had begun as a covert strike against a single shipyard had grown into a full-blown movement. The Eclipsed were no longer a fringe group, they had become a symbol of defiance, of resistance against the human empire. And with every passing day, their ranks grew. Kane knew that to maintain control, he needed to strike hard and fast, before the rebellion could spread even further. But there was one problem: the Eclipsed were smarter than he had anticipated. They had outmaneuvered his forces at every turn, staying hidden in the vast corners of the galaxy where humanity's reach had yet to fully grasp. The Empire's intelligence networks, which had once been the envy of the galaxy, were now riddled with infiltrators, spies, and traitors. Determined to root out the threat once and for all, Kane turned to his most trusted lieutenant, General Lyra Sarn, a ruthless tactician who had been with him since the earliest days of humanity's rise. She was the architect of the Empire's most brutal campaigns, the one who had orchestrated the fall of entire species and had been instrumental in securing humanity's dominance. She was also the one who had helped create the Phoenix-class dreadnoughts. Lyra's plan was one of utter devastation. She had uncovered intelligence that the Eclipsed were hiding in plain sight, taking refuge on a remote world deep in the galactic fringe, a planet that had once been a Vothar stronghold. The planet, called Draction, had been abandoned after the collapse of the Vothar Empire, but in the years since, it had been repopulated by exiles, war criminals, and refugees from every corner of the galaxy. The Eclipsed had found a perfect hiding place there. Kane's forces were preparing for a full assault, but Lyra had another idea. She understood that simply bombing Draction into oblivion would not eliminate the Eclipsed's resolve. They needed a demonstration, one that would break their spirit and show them the price of rebellion. Lyra suggested deploying humanity's most terrifying weapon, the Phoenix Protocol itself, unleashed on a planet for the first time. The decision was made. Kane, despite the risks, gave the go-ahead for the attack. Draction would become the galaxy's grim reminder of humanity's might. In one fell swoop, they would demonstrate what would happen to those who dared to challenge the Empire. The strike began with the deployment of 2 Phoenix-class dreadnoughts, each carrying enough firepower to wipe out entire cities in mere moments. As they entered the planet's orbit, they unleashed devastating energy pulses, obliterating entire continents. The planet, once a refuge for the oppressed, was transformed into a hellscape. The ground shook as earthquakes ravaged the surface, and massive storms erupted, fueled by the intense heat of the blasts. Draction's once thriving population was reduced to ash. But Kane's forces didn't stop there. They descended into the planet's core, where the Eclipsed leadership had made their stronghold. Lyra herself led the assault, accompanied by her elite soldiers, to capture or eliminate every last member of the resistance. In the heart of Draction's ruined capital, the final confrontation took place. The Eclipsed leader, Voss, was cornered in the shattered ruins of a once grand palace. But when Lyra and her forces arrived, they found not the defeated, broken rebels they had expected, but an unyielding resolve in the form of Voss himself. Voss, his identity still a mystery, stood surrounded by his most loyal followers, the last remnants of the Eclipsed leadership. He was not the coward Kane had believed him to be. Despite the overwhelming odds, Voss had no intention of surrendering. Instead, he gave his followers one last command: to fight to the death. The battle that ensued was vicious. Lyra and her soldiers fought through the ruins, pushing their way through ambushes and traps set by the Eclipsed. Every corner held a new threat, and every step closer to Voss was met with resistance. Finally, in the heart of the palace, Lyra faced Voss in single combat. The two were locked in a brutal, desperate struggle, both of them skilled in the art of war. But as the battle raged on, Lyra began to see something in Voss, something that set him apart from the rebels she had fought before. There was no fear in his eyes. No hope of escape. He was not fighting for survival, he was fighting for something more. He was fighting for the soul of the galaxy. In the end, it was Lyra's superior skill that won out. With a swift strike, she incapacitated Voss and brought him before Cain, alive. His capture sent a powerful message to the galaxy: the Eclipsed had been broken, their leader taken. But the true cost of the victory was not in the blood spilled on Draction, but in the realization that humanity's rule was no longer unchallenged. The Phoenix Protocol had burned through the planet, but it had not extinguished the flames of rebellion. In fact, it had only stoked them. The Eclipsed were gone, but their message was not. The galaxy had seen the true face of humanity's power, and in doing so, had begun to question whether it was truly the way forward. Cain, for all his might, now knew that the war was not just against the Eclipsed. It was against the very idea of what humanity had become. And in the shadows, new forces were already gathering, ready to take the place of the fallen resistance. The blood of the Phoenix had been spilled, but it would not be the last. The fall of Draction should have marked the end of humanity's greatest challenge, a moment of triumph where the galaxy would once again bow to Cain's vision of a united empire. The Eclipsed, now shattered and leaderless, had been crushed beneath the weight of the Phoenix Protocol. Voss was imprisoned, his secret identity exposed as a once prominent general of the Vothar Empire who had sought to use the rebellion as a means to restore his lost power. The rebellion was defeated, its morale shattered, its leadership broken. But even as Cain stood over the wreckage of Draction, the first cracks began to show in the foundation of the empire he had built. The victory had been costly. Though Draction had burned, the fires of rebellion had not been extinguished. The Eclipsed may have been defeated, but their message had been heard. Across the galaxy, factions that had previously cowered under humanity's rule began to reconsider their positions. Some were emboldened, realizing that the power of humanity, while great, was not invincible. Others, seeing the atrocities carried out in Draction's name, felt a stirring of doubt, a whisper that perhaps the galaxy was better off without the Empire, no matter how powerful it seemed. Cain felt the shift, too. The death and destruction he had ordered on Draction had not crushed the spirit of rebellion, it had galvanized it. The Phoenix Protocol, once humanity's greatest weapon, had now become a symbol of terror, a reminder of the Empire's cruelty. It was no longer the invincible force it had once been, it had become a weapon of oppression, a tool used to subjugate, to silence those who would speak out. And the galaxy had taken notice. Even worse, Cain's inner circle began to fracture. Lyra Sarn, the woman who had helped lead humanity's rise to power, began to question the methods they were employing. She had always been ruthless, but the slaughter on Draction had unsettled her. It wasn't just the lives lost, it was the realization that humanity's power, once forged in the fires of war and revolution, was now being used to crush the very ideals they had once fought for. "What have we become?" Lyra asked one evening, as the two stood in the silent, Cold War room aboard the flagship Dominion. Cain looked at her, his face etched with the scars of years of conflict, his gaze hard, unyielding. "We've become the rulers of the galaxy," Cain replied, his voice devoid of doubt. "We've become what we were meant to be. The galaxy will submit to us, or it will burn." "But at what cost?" Lyra countered, her eyes narrowing. "We've eradicated every threat, but there's nothing left but ashes. Do you think the galaxy will bow to that? Do you think the galaxy will forget what we've done?" Cain's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Deep down, he knew that Lyra was right. The victory at Draction had left a bitter taste in his mouth. The galaxy feared humanity, but fear alone could not hold it together. Humanity's empire was founded on the very same principles of dominance that had once made the Vothar Empire so despised. What was the difference between them now? A message came through from the Galactic Council, the leaders of the subjugated races, those who had once been allies or vassals of the Vothar. The message was simple, a call for negotiations. It wasn't an offer of peace, but a warning. The galaxy would not continue to bow to the iron grip of humanity. If Cain did not come to the table, if humanity did not change its ways, a new rebellion would rise, one that would be unlike any before. The galaxy was beginning to turn against humanity. Cain, ever the pragmatist, knew he had two choices: continue to enforce his rule with an iron fist, crushing every uprising in its infancy, or face the growing rebellion head-on and attempt to forge a new path, one that might allow humanity to maintain control, but without the need for constant bloodshed. The problem was, Kane no longer trusted the galaxy. He had seen firsthand how quickly alliances could dissolve, how fragile peace truly was. The Vothar had once ruled through fear, and it had been their downfall. Was that humanity's fate as well? In the quiet after the message, Kane turned to Lyra. "We go to the negotiations," he said finally. His voice was not just weary, it was almost resigned. "But I will not compromise. The galaxy will bend to humanity's will, or we will make it." Lyra said nothing for a moment, but she nodded slowly. Her loyalty to Kane was absolute, but even she could see that the future of humanity was no longer as clear-cut as it had once been. The galaxy, once broken and divided, was now united not by peace, but by fear. And that fear would soon be tested. The galaxy had seen what humanity was capable of, and it was no longer willing to sit idly by. The Phoenix Protocol had burned Draction to the ground, but it had also ignited a fire that would consume humanity's empire if they weren't careful. As Kane prepared to meet with the Galactic Council, he could feel the weight of the galaxy's gaze upon him. The age of humanity's dominance was not over, but it was fragile. The reckoning was coming, whether he was ready or not. And in the dark corners of the galaxy, new movements were already rising. Not for freedom, but for survival. The war for the future of the galaxy had not ended. It was only just beginning.